there, Power Kids. It's Mr. Keith. It's been a while since I've talked to you. It's great to see you. I hope everybody's doing well and that everybody's being safe during this time. Today I'd like to talk to you about knowledge, specifically God's kind of knowledge, or if you think about it, God knowing everything. He's all-knowing, or if you want to get a fancy word, He's omniscient. So there's a fancy word. Tell your mom and dad. You ever watch the show Jeopardy? How those guys can answer all those questions, and you think, how do they even know those things? Well, if we think about it, I mean, God could just blow those guys away on that kind of show because He knows all the answers to all the questions. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you about today, is that God is all-knowing. He knows everything. And I want to read some verses to you in Psalms. Psalm 139, and it starts at the very first verse. It says, Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before, and you laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, and I cannot attain it. So what that's telling us is that God knows everything about us. He knows who you are. He knows what you like. He knows what you're going to do in the future. God is that all-knowing about you. And if you think about it, wouldn't it be something if you could know what was going to happen tomorrow? Or what all the answers are to the big test coming up? Or who was going to win the big game before it even happened? Well, God knows all those things already. And He knows who you are. Now, sometimes, if you think about it, when we make friends, what do we do to make friends? You start asking questions about that person. You ask them, well, what do they like to do? What's their name? You know, where do they live? What's their favorite color? What's their favorite food? All those kind of things. And you got to ask those questions so you can get to know those people. Well, sometimes we can be a little guarded. And we might say to ourselves, well, I don't want to give out all that information because I don't know you. And maybe if I tell you something, maybe you won't like me if you learn something about me that's negative maybe. Well, you know what? God knows you already. And He knows everything. And even though He knows everything, that's the good and the bad, He still loves you. Now, if you continue on to read in that Psalm 139, first it talks about how God knows us. He knows everything about us. And the next few verses right after that talk about how God is everywhere we go. So He knows what we're doing wherever we're at. You know, He talks about how God is in the heavens. He's there. If I were to go to the store, God's there. If I go to school, God's there. So it talks about that God is everywhere with us, knowing what we're doing. Just a little bit more, if you continue to read that whole Psalm 139, it talks about God knows you so well that He knew you before you were even in your mom's belly. Even before you, can you imagine that? Knowing someone before they were even in their mom's belly. God knew you then. So what it tells us is God knew you then. He knew who you were going to be, what your name is going to be, what color skin you're going to have, what color hair you're going to have. All those things He already knew. You know what part of that is? Because God made you. And that's the next part of that same song. This psalm, when I read it, and I thought, well, this is going to talk about God's knowledge, but really it talks about all different things that God is to us. So He knew you before you were even born. And if you read on, in the last part of that psalm, it talks about how God is our protector. And God knows who our enemies are. He knows who may be doing things against us. And He's there for us at all times. He knows what's going to happen. Now, if we think about it, isn't that kind of awesome that someone who knows everything about you, whether it's good or bad, and He still loves you so much? You know what? And I was reading, you know, there is one thing that a verse that I read talks about, something that God necessarily doesn't know, or doesn't remember, I should say. when you accept Jesus into your heart, God doesn't remember the things you did in the past. He forgets all that. Anything bad thing you said to your brothers and sisters, or disobeying mom and dad, or whatever it may be that you've done wrong, God forgets all that, doesn't know it anymore, because you came to know Jesus and who he is. So that's the one thing that we can say that God doesn't know or doesn't remember anymore, because you're under his protection, and because Jesus died, and God promises he'd forget those things. So I think it's kind of special that when we think about it, that God, I encourage you to ask mom and dad to sit down and read Psalm 139 with you, and you'll see that in that it shows us how God knows us. He knows who we are. He knows what we're going to say. He knows everything about us. It talks about how God is everywhere. He's with us wherever we go. School, home, the park, friends' houses, wherever, God is with us. It talks about how God made us. He created us. He put us together. He knows everything in putting us together. He knows how to do that. And then it talks about how God protects us and how he's there for us, and he knows what kind of things might come against us to discourage us, to make us sad, to hurt us even. So I encourage you to go and read those kind of things. That way you can get God's knowledge in you. And the way to get God's knowledge is to read his word, because that tells us all about who God is, tells us about his heart and what he has for us and what he wants from us. So it's been great talking to you today. Thanks so much for listening. I hope everybody's doing well again, and take care. Love you.